quite sure he's right. Obsessionally neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
We're talking about putting a manifestly irresponsible man on national television.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
War. This is the end game.
I mean, as long as you're reasonable. You have to be reasonable. We have to be reasonable. Thank you very much.
Have to be reasonable. It is Monday, April 14th, 2025, the 85th day of the Golden Age. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. All right. I hope you all had a wonderful weekend. Lots of things happening over the weekend. And one of those things that happened, I find very interesting because I used to be in Hollywood. I used to be a supporter of Democrat politics and Hollywood liberalism and all of that. And Bill Maher used to be a man that I looked up to as like an intellectual leader, I guess you could say. He seemed like he was more reasonable than the leftists. He obviously was fighting against the way cultural conservatism is at least portrayed in the media. And of course, as a Hollywood liberal, that's appealing. But I was watching Maher ever since, I don't know, early 2000s. Politically incorrect, even before his real-time show started, probably now, almost 20 years ago. But he had dinner with Donald Trump last week and had a number of really nice things to say about the occasion. And I don't think that we need to give him too much credit, but it's kind of an interesting turnaround. Some would say capitulation. Let's have a quick look.
We were walking through it is an amazing tour of the whole house. And I don't remember exactly what we were talking about, but it must have been something with the 2020 election, because I know he used the word lost. And I distinctly remember saying, wow, I never thought I'd hear you say that. He didn't get mad. He's much more self-aware than he lets on in public. Look, I get it. It doesn't matter who he is at a private dinner with a comedian. It matters who he is on the world stage. I'm just taking as a positive that this person exists, because everything I've ever not liked about him was, I swear to God, absent, at least on this night with this guy. Bob, Kid Rock, told me the night before, he said, if you want to get a word in edgewise, you're going to have to cut him off. He'll just go on. Not at all. I've had so many conversations with prominent people who are much less connected, people who don't look you in the eye, people who don't really listen because they just want to get to their next thing, people whose response to things you say just doesn't track, like, what? None of that with him. And he mostly steered the conversation to, what do you think about this? I know, your mind is blown, so's mine.
So an interesting response, an interesting interaction. And of course, Bill Maher went on about their meeting for about 12 minutes. I'm not going to obviously play the whole thing. He kind of scales back his reassessment of Donald Trump. And I don't mean that he negates it. I just mean that he kind of balances it out a little bit by saying, you know, he's still angry about this, and he does this in the day, and then he's like this with me at night. And it's almost like he's trying to convey that there are two Donald Trumps. And I don't mean that in any strange way. People in Badlands often talk about how the Donald, this is one of Burning Bright's things. The Donald, the character on television, this is the Trump persona turned up to 11, and that Trump, the man, is somehow different than that. And so it's not necessarily an insult to say that he presents differently on television than he does in person, but I'm not sure that he actually presents all that differently on television. I think it's that Bill Maher has no idea and has not made an attempt to understand what Trump is actually doing and what his supporters actually support about him. And when you don't do that, when you're looking at everything from the perspective of that very much inside the system, within the bounds of the central narrative sort of liberalism, not at all awakened to the fact that most of what they believe is founded on nothing. And I can say that as a person who used to have a lot of those beliefs. That realization is not present. So they're just surprised that the person isn't as much of an enemy as he's portrayed to be and that they have portrayed him to be. They find that shocking. Oh, this must be an exception to the rest of what I know, rather than questioning whether the rest of what you know is wrong. And maybe Bill Maher will do that at some point. I hope that he will. I know that people don't like Bill Maher a whole lot, and that's just fine. I get the reasons. And yes, the Kid Love Productions thing is very strange, regardless of, and the reason is people don't understand the reason. Not that it makes it better, but it's the company with Kid from Kid and Play. I think his name's Chris Reed or something like that. So all that stuff is creepy. He's got a creepy kind of personal story. I've had a few interactions with the guy over my years in Hollywood. He didn't really seem much different than he presents on television. He's kind of arrogant. He's kind of an elitist. And I guess in his position, he's entitled to that. And everybody can be however they want. And if you like him, you like him. If you don't, you don't. But I would hope at some point he will reassess some of these other foundational beliefs that guide his liberal identity, because these things are going to matter. And leave Bill Maher aside now. There are certain points at which there is crossover to people who are portrayed as the other side within the uniparty controlled opposition dynamic. And I think it's important to recognize where those commonalities are and shun that media presentation of what the two sides are. And so we're going to talk a bunch today about what these two sides actually are. And, you know, if you've been listening to the show for any length of time, you've probably heard some of that discussion over the years through the good twin, evil twin dynamic. But Donald Trump is becoming a unifying figure. And I'm the person who still has, and might as well pull it up. This post, for whatever reason, still triggers people. And I'm not sure why. Well, I mean, I guess I'm kind of understanding why, but they don't really. It's because people are misunderstanding the point. I'll just present it, and then you can decide for yourself whether this is hard to figure out. I said this is on Christmas Eve of last year. Trump isn't the one out there demanding unity. Trump is out there dividing people. So every issue is battled out and consensus begins forming around the right answer, not whatever yields compromise or whatever supports a particular party. The goal is not unity. Unity in a time like this requires compromising to the point of corruption. That's what compromising with evil requires. It's mostly done out of fear of the necessary conflict. That's how we got here. Stand in truth, let the sifter do the work. And the sifter is something I've talked about many, many times over the years. It's kind of just every time there's one of those dividing processes, you see what falls out and what stays in, and you mix everything up again. So I wonder if we're seeing a moment where the collective consciousness of the country is beginning to coalesce around Donald Trump, and I think that we have more indirect proof of that. I talk often about the obvious and overwhelming public mandate. I believe Donald Trump has that, and I believe that he is intentionally proving that over and over again. And one of the ways that he does that is by appearing at these UFC events for the walk-ins. He gets just a raucous response from the crowd. And here is that. So there is Donald Trump making his entrance. I think that that's his granddaughter, Kai, next to him. I don't know who the kid was, maybe also part of the family. He goes up, gets that very warm embrace from Joe Rogan, the most popular podcaster in the country, the most popular media figure in the country. And there's other footage of that where Rogan tells him how happy he is for him and is very respectful, and that's wonderful. Chants of USA, he's greeted like a conquering hero. That video continues on for another minute and a half. He walks around and greets Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and looks like he kind of gives the cold shoulder to RFK Jr.'s wife, Cheryl Hines. He comes back later and is nice to her and greets her and stuff, having just seemingly been an accident and mistaken omission. Kash Patel's there. Elon Musk is there. It's just the entire Tulsi Gabbard's there. The entire cast of characters is there with Donald Trump as a stadium of 20,000 people is just cheering and chanting USA. I've never seen anything like that. Obama was popular, or at least we had the display of his popularity. But this is a live crowd that is coordinated around a fight and the culture around UFC, of which Joe Rogan is, of course, a part. And MAGA is a part of UFC, considering Dana White's prominence and, the political stances that many of the fighters have taken. So it's certainly a home crowd, but it's not like he coordinated it with activist groups to fly people to a Kamala Harris rally. That's my point. This is proof of his obvious and overwhelming mandate, and these things happen over and over again. The market responds when the television is saying it should all collapse, and it responds with strength, and it's staying at least level. It's not exploding right now. It did for a bit. I think that was maybe Thursday last week or Wednesday last week, but it's mostly level. But that means people aren't bailing on Donald Trump, and they're not getting scared off. And that is why we have this ongoing display of complete and total chaos, or at least the framing of all of this as chaos. And this is something that I've talked about, I think, a few times over the past few weeks, that would be the next attempt by the media to reframe these major changes that Donald Trump is implementing as really dangerous and destabilizing for society. And that's part of the stock market freak out, of course. That's a much higher level concern on the part of the regime. But I was stunned by this, seeing this over the weekend. I guess Western Lensman put this together. But look at this supercut of media figures trying to generate the feeling of chaos in their audience.
This hour with the chaos. The average American sees chaos. The American people see chaos.
It's total chaos. You brought chaos.
It's just complete chaos.
Unleashed an economic chaos.
They unleash chaos.
They are creating chaos.
This chaos.
There's too much chaos.
Total chaos.
That amidst the chaos,
we're going to see chaos.
After seeing all the chaos
he has unleashed on America
continue to see the chaos.
Economic chaos.
A lot more chaos.
Trump's chaos. This is chaos with such chaos.
The chaos, because of this chaos. Chaos.
All of this chaos.
Uncertainty and chaos.
Given all that chaos.
When it's chaos.
All the chaos.
Chaos and confusion grows.
More chaos, dysfunction.
The chaos is the purpose. The chaos is the goal.
It's chaos.
It's incredible. The inversion is incredible. Hearing the word chaos that many times, it's one of those things where it like stops sounding like a word or a concept. You're like, I'm never going to say that again. Adam Schiff, I think that was Adam Schiff right there at the end saying the chaos is the goal. Well, that's the inversion. The chaos presenting changes that must be made as chaos is the goal for people trying to prevent the changes from being made, because changes are coming. Our world is changing, and nothing and nobody is going to stop whatever that change is. It's already implemented. If we understand it from the informational timeline perspective, the people at the forefront of this are well ahead of where we are. They understand what's coming next. And actually, Trump had a really interesting post on exactly that this morning. Here it is on Truth Social. He said, the definition of intelligence is the ability to predict the future. Well, how do you predict the future? There's one way you can do that, by creating the future, or you can just be perceiving reality in a way that corresponds more directly to reality prime. You are therefore closer to real time, not getting confused by the various media inversions and the false reality layers that are stacked on top of reality prime. But the creating of the future and the knowledge of what's coming relative to where we understand things to be, what is in our future, well, people who are kind of leading us toward that future, they already know. They're already anticipating it. They're already operating in that future environment, okay? There's nothing that's going to prevent it from occurring because it's already occurred. Like it's already baked into the cake, for instance, that many of these layers of false reality, if not all of them, are going to drop away to nothing as the information, if we approach singularity, I mean, that's a theory. I think it's pretty obviously happening. But we're talking about the dropping away of what people understand in many ways to be their reality. And there are two options then. It can all be presented as chaos, and that chaos can be increased through people's actions, partly as a result of them perceiving what's happening around them as chaotic. But the increase in chaos is what's meant to stop whatever is being implemented. The implementation of those things, I think I'm repeating myself now. I kind of got off track there for a second, and I want to, sometimes I shouldn't weave. Let's move forward into this. My point is that, this is what I was going to say. On the other side, rather than amplifying the chaos, rather than generating more of it through people's beliefs, what could be done is we could have an open and honest public conversation about the changes that are occurring, because we're not getting that. We're getting it from various corners in bits and pieces. If we are able to lay all that out and kind of put that puzzle together in a way that makes sense, maybe we wouldn't have to perceive all of these things as chaotic. Maybe we would be able to embrace certain aspects, or at least rationally deal with the aspects that we didn't want to embrace. And that's one of the things that I'm, often referencing when we're talking about that great reset train speeding down through the canyon. You got the horseback Western gangs riding down on either side of it. They both want to rob the train and steer it to their desired destination and take everything that's on that train. And they're going to fight they're going to fight it out once they meet at that point, and one side will win and one side will lose, and we will be off into our new reality. And so to be able to influence that, we have to be able to rationally approach these things with an understanding of what is to come. And the media is doing everything it can to prevent that from happening because they don't want the new reality to be understood in certain ways. And I hope all that makes sense. I want to talk about this really interesting article over the weekend in The Guardian, of all places, by the extremely liberal Naomi Klein. Now, Naomi Klein is famous for the concept of the shock doctrine. And I'll get the machine to give me a quick so that I don't flub it in any way. The shock doctrine argues that neoliberal capitalism advances through the exploitation of crises, wars, natural disasters, and political upheavals to impose radical free market policies while populations are too disoriented to resist. The book traces this strategy, termed disaster capitalism, back to Milton Friedman in the Chicago School of Economics and blah, blah, blah. Deregulation, privatization, state retrenchment. Those are the threats that she is pinpointing in Milton Friedman's work. So she is clearly a leftist. There's no question about that. And she's clearly suffering from the same inversion, the total inversion within the false reality that Bill Maher is suffering from, which is not to say that everything she observes is wrong. It's just that the meaning is backwards. She doesn't understand economies to be a result of a top-down centralized control system. She doesn't understand these disasters to be caused directly and intentionally. She simply imagines them as occurring naturally and then applies the intent only in the response to those disasters. And so I think you'll see some of that in this article. It's a really long article, so I'm going to go through just some parts of it. I would encourage you to read it. It's not a bad read, as long as you're understanding the inversion, the political biases, and we'll go through some of the mistakes I think she makes. But again, some of the observations are just part of what's happening right now. They're that Western gang riding down on the bad side of the canyon, as far as I'm concerned. And she is going to attribute much of that to Donald Trump, which I think is mistaken. So the article is called The Rise of End Times Fascism. The subheadline: the governing ideology of the far right has become a monstrous supremacist survivalism. Our task is to build a movement strong enough to stop them. And it's especially funny to me because the movement that she's talking about is what is going to pull people back and have them desperately clinging on to even the bad parts of the old system. And I think that she is a proponent of that unwittingly throughout this. But let's just have a look, and she can speak for herself. And she has a co-writer here too, Astor Taylor, who I'm not familiar with. The movement for corporate city-states cannot believe it's good luck. For years, it has been pushing the extreme notion that wealthy, tax-averse people should up and start their own high-tech fiefdoms, whether new countries on artificial islands in international waters, quote-unquote seasteading, or pro-business freedom cities, such as Prospera, a glorified gated community combined with a Wild West med spa on a Honduran island. And that is totally worth a look, by the way. Yet despite backing from the heavy hitter venture capitalists Peter Thiel and Mark Andreessen, their extreme libertarian dreams kept bogging down. It turns out most self-respecting rich people don't actually want to live on floating oil rigs, even if it means lower taxes. And while Prospera might be a nice holiday and some body upgrades, its extra national status is currently being challenged in court. So we have Peter Thiel and Mark Andreessen. These are two names we've discussed a number of times. They're kind of just on opposite sides of the divide in the left-right Democrat, not actual left-right, but as it's presented, Democrat-Republican controlled opposition dynamic, pursuing largely similar paths. Mark Andreessen, as I've noted a number of times, funds organizations like the Free Press. Peter Thiel seems to have some input, at least, into the contingent of what we're told are the right-wing popular podcasters. I shared a graphic to that effect compiled by the amazing Polly of all people last year numerous times, showing that a lot of what was being pushed out into the informational ecosystem from our side, which ended up with a lot of people who were Trump aligned without being MAGA, a lot of that seems organized and downstream from Peter Thiel. And so we have various brandings of the same ideas that are meant to hit all of these different cultural demographics, let's say, getting them all manufacturing consent for this sort of future. Now, Trump has talked about freedom cities, and she addresses that in just a second, as you might be able to see on the screen. But the idea goes back much further, and I've mentioned it a number of times. Peter Thiel has written the prologue or the preface to the most recent printing of The Sovereign Individual, and this was kind of a model that The Sovereign Individual promoted. That was 26 years ago, I think 1999, right before Y2K. That was seen as a big changeover moment in how data and information was to change our future. And then, of course, she mentions Curtis Yarvin later. He is a proponent of this. He is a philosopher Peter Thiel pays a lot of attention to, and J.D. Vance does as well. So this idea is not totally off base at all. In fact, I would expect that some version of this is definitely coming. And as she notes, some of it is already here. So then the question becomes how we look at that from a moral perspective and a practical perspective. And she's going to discuss a little bit of that in here. But underlying that, and, you know, just to kind of frame the conversation a little bit, is it acceptable that people of significant wealth have land, build a community that functions in the ways they want, providing goods and services as part of that government that people will then kind of subscribe to and pay for, rather than a coercive tax policy that requires us all to give our money to a system, whether we support it or not? And I think it would be really hard to make the argument that something like this shouldn't be allowed. And then, and this is another problem that Naomi Klein kind of just glides right by, like it doesn't, like she doesn't really address it. She wants these things to be disallowed. She wants to build a movement around disallowing them, and believes that somehow state power can be used efficiently to conquer this problem, which I think is totally misguided. I don't even think that makes any sense whatsoever. But let's continue. Now, all of a sudden, this once fringe network of corporate secessionists finds itself knocking on open doors at the dead center of global power. Now, secessionists can have, that's kind of inflammatory language, especially from the Naomi Klein perspective with her general audience and the audience of the Guardian. That sounds like the Deep South wanting to secede from the Union in the Civil War that we definitely weren't lied to about. The first sign that fortunes were shifting came in 2023 when a campaigning Donald Trump, seemingly out of nowhere, promised to hold a contest that would lead to the creation of 10 freedom cities on federal lands. The trial balloon barely registered at the time, lost in the daily deluge of outrageous claims. Since the new administration took office, however, would-be country starters have been on a lobbying blitz, determined to turn Trump's pledge into reality. So we've talked many times about all these contingents, and I think that she calls it, I don't remember what she calls it in here. Maybe we'll get to it. But, oh, here it is. The jerry-rigged coalition of Donald Trump. Is this an aspect of that? Is it something that Trump is actually promoting, or is this something that he agreed to as part of some sort of deal to bring these changes through with stability and peace so the world is not destroyed? I don't know what the answer is. Should we find these ideas threatening? I'm not sure that we should. But Naomi Klein certainly does, because she believes that all the people running it, Donald Trump in particular, are evil, and that these are the bad people, not the ones on her side. And again, I think that that's part of the inversion. And now I'm not, by saying that all these people are good people. I have great concern about Mark Andreessen. I have significant concern about Peter Thiel and the fact that he has installed one of his people as vice president, quote unquote. But we shall see. Let's continue. One might assume that it is contradictory for Trump, elected on a flag-waving America First platform, to lend credence to this vision of sovereign territories ruled over by billionaire god kings. And much has been made of the colorful flame wars between the MAGA mouthpiece Steve Bannon, a proud nationalist and populist, and the Trump-allied billionaires he has attacked as techno-feudalists who don't give a flying F about the human being, let alone the nation state. And conflicts inside Trump's awkward, jerry-rigged coalition certainly exist, most recently reaching a boiling point over tariffs. Still, the underlying visions might not be as incompatible as they first appear. And she makes the argument that they are compatible. And actually, this is what Trump and the people that she understands to be around Trump and influencing Trump actually want. I don't think these are totally compatible. And I have said many times, I'm not tech averse in many ways. I think that the transhumanist thing obviously goes way too far. I think that we have to have a moral foundation underlying our pursuit of technology, but we also have to understand that the tech is being created and ultimately it will be a tool, and we have to decide whether or not it's a tool that we believe we should use and then how we use it, because the use of the tool is where the problem really arises, not necessarily the tool. Because a lot of these tools are out there. They've been used against us predominantly, and we can't just stick our heads in the sand and hope it goes away. So I think Steve Bannon's approach has a lot going for it. Most of you who've watched my show for any length of time understand that I'm a big fan of Steve Bannon. I think he's the philosophical leader of MAGA in a major way. And if you put Steve Bannon against these technocrats, I would choose Steve Bannon every single time. Let's continue. The startup country contingent is clearly foreseeing a future marked by shocks, scarcity, and collapse. That's not actually true, in my estimation. Their high-tech private domains are essentially fortressed escape pods designed for the select few to take advantage of every possible luxury and opportunity for human optimization, giving them and their children an edge in an increasingly barbarous future. To put it bluntly, the most powerful people in the world are preparing for the end of the world, and they themselves are frenetically accelerating. So not only do they anticipate the end of the world, but they are trying to bring about the end of the world as we know it much faster. And she gets into some discussion of Christian Zionism and Zionism, but alludes Zionism. All conversation of Zionism. It's just Christian Zionism is the problem. Are we headed toward end times? I don't think Steve Bannon looks at us as headed toward end times. He understands that there is a changeover in systems, and during that period, things might be a little chaotic. Some of the parts of the old system that we relied on are going to experience a breakdown temporarily as the change occurs. It's not, I would say, that is unavoidable. It seems to me to be unavoidable. From the information timelines perspective, it's already happening. And I'm not sure that our total resistance to the changes that are occurring is the best move for us. I'm not sure that it's the most moral thing to do. It's certainly not the most practical thing to do, although practical concerns should always take a back seat in my mind. We can't be doing bad things just because they work. But Naomi Klein, I don't think is giving this proper treatment, but let's continue. Alive to our era of genuine existential danger, from climate breakdown to nuclear war to skyrocketing inequality and unregulated AI, but financially and ideologically committed to deepening those threats, contemporary far-right movements lack any credible vision for a hopeful future. Now, I think that is preposterous. I think that we can embrace the changes and still be hopeful about the future. I'm hopeful about the future. I understand there are threats out there. I'm deeply concerned about some of those threats, but I'm still hopeful for the future. I don't think the collapsing of the false reality layers, which for many people is going to feel like an obliteration of the reality as they've known it, something that many of us have experienced in different and maybe smaller ways over the past few years. But I don't think that eradicates hope. It's also important to note what she sees as the existential dangers. Climate change is one. Nuclear war is one. Unregulated AI is one. And then later on, she talks about pandemics. And so those are the 4 existential crises, which I've talked about a number of times. We saw during COVID that a pandemic could be hoaxed into reality through public communications and a terrible medical system that is just systematically murdering people. Unregulated AI, is that a huge concern? Maybe. Can you regulate AI from a government level? And would that get these people to stop? And then what would be the enforcement mechanism that would ensure these people stop in the advancement of the technology? And is that even a coherent notion that it can be stopped? And then, of course, we've got the nukes thing, which is, I mean, continually mind-blowing to me. And I think that it's getting blasted apart, especially recently. There is the threat of Iran getting a nuclear weapon at this point, and then there's talk of Israel getting rid of theirs. Donald Trump has already talked about denuclearizing between the United States, Russia, and China. So how could the major superpower nations denuclearize while other countries might get nuclear weapons? And then we have all these rogue actors around the world with nuclear weapons. It all starts to seem a little preposterous. And that's because it is preposterous. And it's always been preposterous. And it is a narrative that causes reaction throughout the world. It is a narrative deterrent system that has been very effective now for 80 years, but is, as we're seeing, losing its effectiveness. But if she believes that nuclear war is an existential threat to humanity, okay. They have this picture. She adds this picture of Kristi Noem in front of MS-13 gang members in El Salvador. And we're going to talk about El Salvador a little later, but let's skip down and continue. The governing ideology of the far right in our age of escalating disasters has become a monstrous supremacist survivalism. It is terrifying in its wickedness, yes, but it also opens up powerful possibilities for resistance. To bet against the future on this scale, to bank on your bunker, is to betray on the most basic level our duties to one another, to the children we love, and to every other life form with whom we share a planetary home. This is a belief system that is genocidal at its core and treasonous to the wonder and beauty of this world. Wow. So she is accusing the people who are like Governments clearly don't work. We've seen that governments don't work. We had this top-down system of control that's eroding, that's going away. What are the new ways that we could envision a future for humanity that would prevent the problems that we have right now? Is there an evolution of human thought and human self-government that would present a brighter future and more options? And one of the things that she gets wrong throughout this is the understanding that Curtis Yarvin is far right and wants everything to be far right. And of course, you know, the claims of fascism are mostly used as a buzzword and pejorative. But Yarvin says explicitly that he's okay with these offshoot communities trying communism if that's what they want to try. So that's not far right. It's he talks about a patchwork, like different places will have different things and people can kind of self-select among those different things because that's the culture that they want to be part of. Those are the services from government that they want to purchase. And I don't think that it's all about only the elites having these offshoot societies, although it's not an unfounded concern. I'm just saying I don't think it is always necessarily that. Let's continue. Where are we? This is okay. We are convinced that the more people understand the extent to which the right has succumbed to the Armageddon complex, the more they will be willing to fight back, realizing that absolutely everything is now on the line. Our opponents know full well that we are entering an age of emergency, but have responded by embracing lethal yet self-serving delusions. Having bought into various apartheid fantasies of bunkered safety, they are choosing to let the earth burn. Our task is to build a wide and deep movement, as spiritual as it is political, strong enough to stop these unhinged traitors. A movement rooted in a steadfast commitment to one another across our many differences and divides, and to this miraculous singular planet. Blah, 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 blah. Liberal pablum. But what I wanted to mention, actually, that I forgot to mention from the paragraph before, is she's accusing these people of mass murder. She's saying that the belief system itself is genocidal, and what they're trying to do is kill everybody that's not them. Now, I'm not saying there aren't parts of the futurist movement that are pursuing that goal. They're replacing human workers with technology. That's one of the potential goals, one of the potential outcomes. Certainly a goal. It's one of the potential outcomes. We've, got the Georgia Guidestones, and you can give that as much credence as you see fit. We also have people like Yuval Noah Harari talking about useless eaters. So what do you do with useless eaters? Well, you create them as kind of a servant class and try to make sure that they don't reproduce. And if you want to make sure that they don't reproduce at scale, you might do things like inject them with experimental medical technologies that can't protect you from a disease that can't kill you under the guise of a new medical savior. And of course, you will lay your children down on the altar of the science, that cold metal table, to be administered this savior vaccine by one of the members of their priestly class in his white robes with all his little machines. So they're genocidal, and they're also happy to allow the world to burn. Those are some pretty significant accusations. And of course, they're treasonous. And you know what people who commit treason get? The death penalty. So this is pretty extreme stuff. And of course, the leftist that she is, she thinks that it is entirely warranted because of the threat as she perceives it. Not so long ago, she writes, it was primarily religious fundamentalists who greeted signs of apocalypse with gleeful excitement about the long-awaited rapture. Trump has handed critical posts to people who subscribe to that fiery orthodoxy, including several Christian Zionists who see Israel's use of annihilatory violence to expand its territorial footprint, not as illegal atrocities, but as felicitous evidence that the Holy Land is getting closer to the conditions under which the Messiah will return and the faithful will get their celestial kingdom. And you can't deny that that's part of a movement that is right now aligned with MAGA. It certainly is. Okay. And they don't prioritize MAGA. They prioritize this brand of Zionism or Christian Zionism. And Christian Zionism is something that has been intentionally indoctrinated into evangelical Christianity over the last, I don't know, 129 years, 100 and something close to that. With the advent of the Zionist movement, then with the Balfour Declaration that led to the United States and others getting involved in World War I, then the work in World War II to establish the regime proxy religious ethno-state by people who refer to themselves as Jewish, regardless of what they actually believe. Most of them, of course, are atheists. So I don't think that she's interpreting this problem correctly, but it's undeniable that that mindset exists and is downstream from the kind of formal and profitable evangelical Christian community that has been schooled on and had their beliefs kind of generated by the Schofield Reference Bible that has been updated a number of times over the last century or so to continue pushing this very brand of kind of eschatology to to become pervasive among society. This is what they actually want. I don't think that she's entirely wrong about that. But let's skip down a bit. She goes into a conversation about Elon Musk and how he wants to escape the planet. And yes, that's, I think, very silly. This is how that part of it concludes. Indeed, in a strange twist on the Old Testament tale, Musk and his fellow tech billionaires, having arrogated godlike powers to themselves, aren't content to just build the arks. They appear to be doing their best to cause the flood. So again, she's now, and I'll just finish this out actually. Today's right-wing leaders and their rich allies are not just taking advantage of catastrophes, shock doctrine, and disaster capitalism style, but simultaneously provoking and planning for them. Okay? So she is insinuating that it is actually these tech billionaires who are causing these crises, as though writers like her, who are not awake, who are easily hoodwinked, who are entirely committed to the party of false decorum, who are in the cult of scientific materialism, who trust the experts about everything, they're not the ones, in her estimation, causing these problems. And I would say, actually, you are exactly the people causing these problems. The media caused the COVID problem. The experts caused the COVID problem. There was no pandemic, okay? There was no pandemic. There may have been a mass poisoning. There was definitely mass murder in hospitals. But there was no pandemic. People were never dying outside. We would have never known there was a disease in our midst had we not been told so by the television and by writers like Naomi Klein, who are very much invested in the science, in the experts, and in the threat of the reality of the threat of these existential crises. Let us continue. The bunkered nation, and this, she's now into a discussion of Steve Bannon. The bunkered nation lies at the heart of the MAGA agenda and of end times fascism. Inside its logic, the first job is to harden national borders and expunge all enemies, foreign and domestic. Is that something the nation state should be allowed to do? Protect its borders and remove its enemies? I don't understand what a nation state could be without those things. But when we're talking about the globalist viewpoint and perspective, well, the nation state is unnecessary. The nation state is a fiction with lines drawn on maps. And part of it, of course, is something of a fiction, okay? But just like you would have your home and people like Naomi Klein, and I'm not sure if Naomi Klein does or does not live in a gated community. She might live in the middle of a big city. I have no idea. But it's certainly people of her social and cultural and quote unquote intellectual class who live in gated communities. Should that be disallowed? Are you not allowed to protect? You're not allowed to lock your door at night? Can people just come in and use your home? You're not allowed to live in a gated community where you want to be someplace that's really safe? And if those two situations are okay, how does that same perspective not apply to a nation state? And then how would it not apply to these offshoot city states, which she's claiming are some sort of bunker for the end times and fascistic in their makeup, which they don't have to be. And some might be, and there might be some people who really want the corporate and the state worlds combined. Yarvin talks about things as like a corporate monarchy. Essentially, the government would be corporation and monarch and state all at once. But there's no forcing function that makes people who don't want to be part of that society be part of it. And then there are the rules of the society once you're inside it. If you're okay about locking your doors and you're okay about the gated community, it seems like you should be okay about the city state and the nation state, but she's not. And that's very strange. This ugly work is now well underway with the Trump administration, she says, enabled by the Supreme Court, having invoked the Alien Enemies Act to deport hundreds of Venezuelan immigrants to Sico, Sicat, I'm not sure which, the now infamous mega prison in El Salvador, the facility which shaves prisoners' heads. Doesn't every jail ever do that? Doesn't the army do that? It's really not that big a deal, honestly. I don't think any man would ever care about having his head shaved. So silly. Maybe it's just scarier that way, I guess. And packs up to 100 people in a single cell stacked with bare bunks, operates under the civil liberties destroying state of exception, first declared over 3 years ago by the country's crypto-loving Christian Zionist Prime Minister Nayib Bukele. And President Bukele of El Salvador was at the White House today. He's probably still there, and we're going to get to a little bit of that later. She says Bukele has offered to provide the same fee-for-service system for U.S. citizens the administration would like to drop into a judicial black hole. I love that, Trump said recently when asked about the proposal. Okay, well, I'm just going to have to assume that she presented his comments totally in context and that Trump should be taken 100% at surface level at his word with "I love that" applying to whatever it is she describes about the proper context. No wonder, she says, Sico is the sick, if logical, corollary of the Freedom City fantasy, a zone where everything is for sale and due process does not apply. We should expect much more of this sadism. And she's assuming that due process has not been applied, or that were it applied, it would not find that these people are guilty of being in the cartels and the criminal gangs that they are accused of being part of. And one would think that the tattoos all over their bodies would probably be proof of their membership to these cartels and gangs. Perhaps not. If policing the boundaries of the bunkered nation is end times fascism's job one, equally important is job two for the U.S. government to lay claim to whatever resources its protected citizens might need to get through the tough times ahead. Maybe it's Panama's canal or Greenland's fast melting shipping routes, because climate change, of course, or Ukraine's critical minerals, or Canada's fresh water. We should think of this less as old school imperialism than supersized prepping at the level of the nation state. Gone are the old colonial fig leaves of spreading democracy or God's word. when Trump covetously scans the globe, he is stockpiling for civilizational collapse, as though it could be nothing else that he's attempting to do. We've talked a number of times. The global regime, the control mechanism for overthrowing countries and then controlling the world, ultimately requires control of the media, control of the finance, the economics, the sanctions, the ability to wage economic warfare, control over resources, control over trade routes, and then ultimately control over militaries. That was the status quo ante. That's how things were before. That's not how things are going to be in the future, because the control of those critical components is being removed from the regime and then split apart, fragmented into the multipolar world order. It's not just that it's switching over and it's going to be dominated by the evil side now rather than the good side that's always been controlling it. It's that centralized system of top-down control is being obliterated and fragmented. That is not at all the same as planning for civilizational collapse. The plan is to move from the centralized system into a more fragmented and decentralized system. And it's funny because she doesn't want the nation state to function as a nation state. She wants the nation state to be part of a borderless global order. But now she's concerned about the fragmenting too. The fragmenting would be an alternative to the nation state. What is it that she wants? The bunker mentality also helps explain J.D. Vance's controversial forays into Catholic theology. Is that really that controversial? The vice president, who owes his political career in no small part to the largesse of the premier prepper Thiel, explained to Fox News that according to the medieval Christian concept of Ordo Amoris, translated both as order of love and order of charity, love is not owed to those outside the bunker. You love your family, then you love your neighbor, then you love your community, and then you can love your fellow citizens in your own country. And then after that, Naomi Klein opines, or sorry, this is actually just how it is, sorry. And then after that, you can focus and prioritize the rest of the world. And then she opines, or not, as the Trump administration's foreign policy would indicate. In other words, we owe nothing to anyone outside our bunker. That is not what that means at all. And it actually says you can focus and prioritize the rest of the world. Of course, the rest of the world should be of lower concern than your family, your neighbor, your community, and then your country. We've talked about localism countless times. We should understand that because the reality as we know it is predominantly a reality projected to us through media, a lot of the truth about issues, about things that are happening across the world, whether it's wars or economic devastation or the style of government in another country, our understanding of those is all a function of what's communicated to us. And we can understand that what's communicated to us is predominantly that which is written by intelligence organizations with the goal of creating belief among people that will help them generate the world desired by those intelligence organizations to propel a particular agenda. That's what it's always been. Okay. And within that, there is no discernible, credible reality that we can pick up on a consistent enough basis to be able to form our reality around that outer reality to the extent we can perceive it, because we can't perceive it to a large extent. And if we are honest about the limits to our knowledge, we can't actually get that far out of just ourselves, the people around us, and maybe a couple layers of people around them. Our community, maybe up to the state level, and that's about it. And so the idea that we can care for 8 billion nameless, faceless people who we will never meet is preposterous. And I don't know it's 8 billion people, but theoretically, if it's 6 billion or if it's 8 billion or if it's 4 billion or whatever it is, it's still more than we can ever comprehend. So we don't actually know what's going on. The only responsible thing to do at that point is to focus more locally. You have commitments to yourself, to your family, then to your community. And those are places that you can actually have a positive effect. And so as things decentralize and fragment, having the focus on these smaller units is going to be just a necessary reality. And she is trying to reframe localism and understanding these small and fragmented units as evil. This is the justification for why we don't have to care about the rest of the world, and we can view the rest of the world then as useless eaters. We can destroy them in nuclear war if they become too much to deal with, etc. And of course, goes back into right wing this, right wing that. Always with the right wing. The right wing is scary. They want to kill us. It's not even what the right wing is. Skipping down. There are emotional compensations on offer. You can cheer the end of affirmative action and DEI, glorify mass deportation, enjoy the denial of gender-affirming care to trans people, villainize educators and health workers who think they know better than you, and applaud the demise of economic and environmental regulations as a way to own the libs. End times fascism is a darkly festive fatalism, a final refuge for those who find it easier to celebrate destruction than imagine living without supremacy. That is very bold. Do these seem like supremacist movements? The end of affirmative action and DEI is not a white supremacist movement. That is egalitarian well, not egalitarian, maybe that might be the wrong word, but it is the basis for our individualistic society and what America was founded on prior to the inversion of our Constitution and our culture through the Civil War and Reconstruction. And again, that's not my argument. It's the argument of George P. Fletcher in Our Secret Constitution, who she would probably read. I would wonder, actually, let's see if the machine can tell me. Has Naomi Klein ever written about George P. Fletcher of Columbia Law School? And it's searching in its pro form. No evidence that she's written about him, though they would be aligned on many of their priorities, though perhaps not on Fletcher's Zionism. Though they can appear benign at first, these ideas are shot through with dangerous racial, ableist, and gender biases about which parts of humanity are worth enhancing and saving and which could be sacrificed for the supposed good of the whole. They also share a marked lack of interest in urgently addressing the underlying drivers of collapse, a responsible and rational goal that a growing cohort of figures now actively shun. Instead of effective altruism, the Mar-a-Lago regular Andreessen and others have embraced effective accelerationism, or the deliberate propulsion of technological development without guardrails. I'm not entirely, I think that she is giving short shrift to that definition of acceleration and accelerationism. And then she goes immediately into Curtis Yarvin, but skips past that, claiming only that it's neo-reactionary pro-monarchy rants, as if there's nothing more in Yarvin or there's nothing more in the neo-reaction. Nick Land, I'm not sure about this, and I would like to talk to Nick Land at some point. I'm going to try to figure out a way to reach out and get in touch with him. But he seems to be engaged in the same process many of us are engaged in and approaches it from an academic philosophical background. He's extraordinarily well read. I've talked about him. I talked about him a great deal last fall when I was reading his book, Xenosystems. But he seems to be waking, and I don't mean to accuse him of not being awake prior, but he seems to be moving in the direction of understanding through the process of skepticism through an understanding of hyperstition and the false reality layers, although he describes them differently. Hyperstition is his word, though. He seems to be moving toward God, in my estimation, which I think is the end of extreme skepticism, applying a consistent and coherent epistemology to what it is we don't know about the world around us. I think at the bottom of all of that, as I've said many times, is that understanding that God is the only reality we can reliably understand. And everything else on top of that is potentially a function of perception and consciousness. And that's a much bigger and different conversation. But the collapse of those false reality layers is something that can be accelerated and maybe should be accelerated. And so I think that to envision this only as a destructive process that is going to lead us into a kind of neo-feudalist technocracy, I don't think that's exactly right. I don't think it's right at all. As the AI scholars skipping down, Timnit Gebru and Emil Torres have written, though the methods may be new, this bundle of ideological fads, quote, are direct descendants of first wave eugenics, end quote. That is utter nonsense. Although maybe their description of it that way, moving to these fragmented societies, caring primarily about those and not what happens in the rest of the world, that means that you are accepting the death of everyone else in the world so you can have your own private thing. In Naomi Klein's view, again, I think that that's just inaccurate and intentionally inflammatory to make a point which can't really be landed in any other way than through an emotional appeal like that. But continuing, which also saw a small subset of humanity making decisions, this is the eugenics movement, about which parts of the whole were worth continuing and which needed to be phased out, cleared out, or terminated. Until recently, few paid attention. So this is, I think, kind of amazing and revelatory, again, about the existential crises. She writes, 3 recent material developments have accelerated end times fascism's apocalyptic appeal. The first is the climate crisis. She goes on to say the second is COVID-19. And the third factor is the rapid advancement and adoption of AI. So these are the accelerating factors. And the idea is that somehow the tech billionaires put these things into motion. So let's break them down. Did the tech billionaires create the climate agenda? There's an argument that they didn't, of course, that this was something that the science discovered. It was our lack of these clean futuristic technologies that put all this carbon pollution into our air and is destroying our environment, causing the climate crisis. That's what Naomi Klein would say. All of that sounds pretty ridiculous. But at the same time, they have convinced governments to push an unbelievable amount of money. And that's ultimately just global central bankers pushing that money to these various projects, pinned on the backs of American people and American workers predominantly, but people all around the world. And because of those investments, we have all of these new technological systems being implemented. We were sold them on the basis of climate change, but what will they exist to do now in terms of nuclear technologies and what is probably going to be the worldwide proliferation of nuclear technologies and other advanced technologies that advanced solar technologies, for instance, that capture and transmit energy in a way that doesn't damage the climate the way they've talked about the climate being damaged. So someone like Naomi Klein should be a proponent of that. But of course, the climate change thing wasn't the real problem. Now we have this potential state in the future where we have this abundant energy that can be captured and transmitted much more cheaply than it was through the top-down centralized control system, part of which was control over the world's resources, which makes energy scarce and expensive. So this is a canard. Then COVID-19, did the tech billionaires cause that? Well, yes, on some level, certainly the technology and the advancement and the propagation of narratives about pandemics comes directly from Yuval Noah Harari and the technocrats and the futurists and the science at an academic level, the medical community, the medical insurance community, the pharma business, etc. But are those the same as the people who just want to live in city states and take advantage of technology as a tool? And now I'm not trying to go too easy on those people. There are maybe drawbacks to that too, and we have to be cognizant of what they want in the future. But we are headed in that direction either way. And to suggest that somehow the pandemics that aren't even real are caused by these people intentionally to initiate this process, I would say, hey, Naomi Klein, these processes and the downsides of them, which are mostly due to narrative manipulations, are a project of the great resetters committed to that sort of globalism, which Naomi Klein has no problem with. In fact, she backs them up in all their claims throughout these ridiculous pandemics, etc. The third factor is the rapid advancement and adoption of AI, and I'm sure we've covered that plenty of times. So skipping ahead. As the UK analyst and editor Richard Seymour reminds us in his recent book, Disaster Nationalism, the apocalypse is no mere fantasy. We are living in it, after all, from deadly viruses to soil erosion, from economic crisis to geopolitical chaos. And, you know, I think it's maybe worth pulling this up. I didn't before, but let's recall the World Economic Forum's polycrisis. Did a whole episode about this a couple years ago, January 2023. We're on the brink of a polycrisis. How worried should we be? Are we to believe that Donald Trump is on board with the World Economic Forum's agenda, and that the other leaders of sovereign nations around the world are on board with the World Economic Forum's agenda? We're talking about the emergence of the multipolar world order and away from the top-down centralized control of the one world, rules-based, liberal international order. That's the divergence here. The World Economic Forum seems to be squarely on the top-down centralized control mechanism. And Naomi Klein also likes that. In fact, she thinks it should be strengthened to prevent people from decentralizing in the ways that they want to, because that is too threatening to everyone else in the world. Well, who's she to say that? Does Trump support the World Economic Forum agenda? I have never thought so. Some people out there think so. Some people think that he's ushering in the Zionist agenda with his associations with Israel and the efforts made to combat anti-Semitism, etc. Is that correct? I don't think so. I've talked about why many times, but you can't rule it out entirely. Just like you can't rule out entirely that he's not dog walking us into that greatest dystopia. But I don't think that. It would be awfully hard to convince me of that. Do I allow for some small possibility that we've missed something very significant about Trump? Sure, I do. And that's why we have to be watchful about these things. But I don't think he's doing that. I don't think he supports the World Economic Forum's agenda. But Naomi Klein does about virtually everything. Like there aren't technocrats and transhumanists in there. She defends, in this article, she has comments from a trans musical artist that she only refers to as she, that Naomi Klein, and her co-writer, I should say, only refer to as she. And she doesn't see any problem with that. So she supports trans people who want to identify and live however they want, but not transhumanism. They're the same thing. And you support those people living however they want and the forcing mechanism to make all of us agree that they are the thing they're not, but you can't go live by yourself in a city state that you start with your own money. I don't get it. It's crazy. It's actually crazy. Let's continue. Trump's, oh, sorry. Let me put the article back up here. Here we are. Trump 2.0's economic project is a Frankenstein's monster of the industries driving all of these threats: fossil fuels, weapons, and resource ravenous cryptocurrency and AI. Everyone involved in these sectors knows that there is no way to build the artificial mirror world that AI promises to construct without sacrificing this world. These technologies consume too much energy, too many critical minerals, and too much water for the two to coexist in any kind of equilibrium. Well, again, you have to embrace the nonsense that we've been fed throughout our lifetimes, still believing it, to agree with Naomi Klein's concerns here. Too much energy? Well, if we understand that the regime has controlled energy resources and we're moving into a future where they don't control energy resources, and we have these technologies that have been held back, brought online, and energy becomes abundant and cheaper, that's what I see coming. I think there's a lot of good reasons to believe that. And actually, General Stephen Quast is joining Burning Bright and I tomorrow evening for Badlands Story Hour. We're going to discuss the movie Top Gun Maverick. We'll discuss some of the energy stuff for certain as well. Too many critical minerals. We just talked about on Friday how Japan, because China was cutting them off from their rare earths, which aren't rare. It's just the process. Elon had a great post about that over the weekend. I'm not sure if I can quickly find it, but talk about how it's not that they're actually rare. It's that the ability to refine them is rare and expensive. And that's why it's an issue. Seems like a major scaling back of the importance of the rare earths, especially with the Taiwan thing, the China thing, etc., the Ukraine thing. And then too much water. Well, we just found out through the LA fire period that water scarcity was also a problem caused intentionally, but by people on that side, explained to us as a result of climate change and our reliance on fossil fuels. So her concerns are part of the false reality that is itself dropping away, and she can't imagine that she's wrong about all these things. People who are elitists in their mindset, who have extensive education, who have intellectually oriented careers, it's impossible for many people, but have a really hard time admitting, oh, wow, I was wrong about basically everything I thought in terms of the ways the world's constructed. And that's something that I had to deal with. I'm writing about that right now, and it'll be the first chapter of the book when I finish it. The joy of having been wrong. Okay. It's finding out that actually I was wrong about virtually everything that I thought I knew. And when you admit that, the learning process can begin again. And as you move through that learning process, you realize, oh, wait, the traditional belief systems make sense because they had to deal with how the world actually existed, okay? Before the simulation effect, before the hyper reality. And once the world around you begins to make sense, more parts of the false reality drop away. You're like, oh, wait, I can just apply this same thing to everything in my understanding. And all of a sudden the world makes more sense. And I feel better and more positive, like I'm in better correspondence with what the world actually is and the people I actually care about who are in a very close range around me. That's a wonderful process to engage. And Naomi Klein seems like she's not going to make it. I hope she does. You can pray for people like this figuring it out, but let's continue. This month, the former Google executive Eric Schmidt admitted as much, telling Congress that AI's profound energy needs are projected to triple in the next few years, with much of it coming from fossil fuels because nuclear can't come online fast enough. This planet incinerating level of consumption is necessary, he explained, to enable an intelligence higher than humanity, a digital god rising from the ashes of our relinquished world. Now, I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that a great many technocrats and futurists and transhumanists believe they are creating a worldly god, the scientific materialist god of our earthly domain, and that would be AI. It's omniscient. It knows everything. It's omnipresent. It exists everywhere. And it's all powerful, omnipotent. It can create the world in its image. I have no doubt that there are people trying to create that right now. That doesn't mean that it's going to work. And it doesn't mean that that AI techno god is going to be imbued with the human spontaneity and the things that make us uniquely human in the image of God. It's never going to have that thing. So these people, A, will fail, and B, are on her side. That's the craziest part. There certainly are some of those sorts of people who are trying to raise an AI tech god who are aligned currently with MAGA. But that's them wearing MAGA as a disguise so that they can pull. They're Trojan horsing. They're trying to use MAGA as a Trojan horse to bring in their future reality. That's not going to work. She says, from the perspective of their ever-expanding bottom lines, the apocalypse is not collapse. It's regulation. So regulation is the ultimate apocalyptic threat to this segment of our population. And she sees the removal of all these regulations and the fragmenting of state control as a gift to these people, when it's a gift to everybody. No one ever voted to have the government control the aspects of our lives and our businesses to the extent it does right now. And it didn't come to be through a process of voting. And it didn't come to be through a constitutional process. It came to be through the very global regime Naomi Klein supports, waging war against human populations in every country on the face of the earth. Psychological war, kinetic war, economic war, information war. That's been going on for centuries, always to lead toward the same agenda, the same system of one world, liberal, international, rules-based order, that same system of control. Skipping down. An unspeakably dismal choice is being made before our eyes and without our consent. Machines over humans, inanimate over animate, profits over all else. With stunning speed, the big tech megalomaniacs have quietly rolled back their net zero pledges and lined up by Trump's side, hell-bent on sacrificing this world's real and precious resources and creativity at the altar of a vampiric virtual realm. This is the last great heist, and they are getting ready to ride out the storms they themselves are summoning. And they will try to defame and destroy anyone who gets in their way. No, Naomi Klein, we're just telling you, you are not interfacing with the reality. And a new reality inside the collective consciousness is forming because other people are dropping away from their commitment to the false reality to which you are committed. We can skip the JD Vance part and the Greta Thunberg part. They're worried that Peter Thiel is threatened by Greta Thunberg. And again, Naomi Klein is 100% committed to the climate hysteria, as virtually every liberal of her stripe is. And that's bonkers. And at some point, they're going to have to let it go, right? At some point, you are forced to let these things go. And the funniest thing is, these people used to be heroes to them, Elon Musk, and I'm not saying to Naomi Klein in particular, but liberals of that stripe. And now they're not, because now they're fascists. Before, they were dealing with the climate crisis. Now they have chose to ignore it. What did she say? How did she describe this? Quietly rolled back their net zero pledges and all their DEI pledges and the rest of it, of course. All of that in line with the World Economic Forum's partners and their code of conduct and the UN migration plans. These people were aligned with those projects all the time. And now they are attempting to use MAGA as the Trojan horse, probably to get the support system that exists behind Donald Trump onto their side and their version of the project. Again, I don't think that's going to work. It's not something that we can't be cognizant about, though. We want to be sure that we understand this thing. But it's not our direction. And there's a much stronger likelihood that Donald Trump, as this unifying force that we can now see in the world, is going to move people away from that and to him rather than away from Trump and to this side of things, the techno-futurist side of things, let's say. And that's what it means. That's the hijacking of the Great Reset. That's the two Western gangs riding through the canyon trying to be the group that steers the train. I don't even really steer a train. You know what I mean? Chooses which rails the train will travel down. Why Thunberg? Why now? It's in part, it's clearly the apocalyptic fear of regulation eating into their super profits. According to Thiel, the science-based climate action Thunberg and others demand could only be enforced by a totalitarian state, which he claims is a more dire threat than climate breakdown. Most distressingly, the taxes under such conditions would be quite high. And Peter Thiel is 100% right about all that. The climate hoax is a far smaller threat. It's no threat at all, probably, like the pandemic. Like pandemics are not a threat. Once people understand, oh, hey, that's just a narrative device used to hoodwink us and get us to give all our money and our power, our control over our lives to this government. She wants the government to have all that power so they can deal with the climate threat. She wants government to protect her from existential crises that are part of the fabrication. And we're almost to the end here. Let's close this out. How do we break this apocalyptic fever? First, we help each other face the depth of the depravity that has gripped the hard right in all of our countries. To move forward with focus, we must first understand this simple fact. We are up against an ideology that has given up not only on the premise and promise of liberal democracy, but on the livability of our shared world and on its beauty, its people, on our children, on other species. The forces we are up against have made peace with mass death. They are treasonous to this world and its human and non-human inhabitants, or they just don't buy in to your ideas about apocalypse and your ideas about prepping for the future, which is your only idea. Give all the power to government and then regulate these companies, these individuals, etc., to make them conform to your preparation version of the future. That's insane. This is how you get left-wing totalitarianism. Second, we counter their apocalyptic narratives with a far better story about how to survive the hard times ahead without leaving anyone behind. A story capable of draining end times fascism of its gothic power and galvanizing a movement ready to put it all on the line for our collective survival. A story not of end times, but of better times, not of separation and supremacy, but of interdependence and belonging, not of escaping, but staying put and staying faithful to the troubled earthly reality in which we are enmeshed and bound. This basic sentiment, of course, is not new. It is central to indigenous cosmologies. And it lies at the heart of animism. All right, so we're just pagan now. Go back far enough, and every culture and faith has its own tradition of respecting the sanctity of here and not searching for Zion in an elusive, ever-distant promised land. In Eastern Europe, before the fascist and Stalinist annihilations, the Jewish Socialist Labor Bund organized around the Yiddish concept of Doikate, or here-ness. Molly Crabapple, who has written a forthcoming book about this neglected history, defines Doikate as the right to fight for freedom and safety in the places where they lived in defiance of everyone who wanted them dead. And of course, we have to take the whole narrative, hook, line, and sinker, to believe this, even though she is arguing for one side that is slightly opposed to Zionism rather than the side that is totally committed to Zionism. And I mean, the opposition to Zionism in the Jewish world, from my perspective, maybe somebody can make a counter argument, I don't know, seems to be very minimal and very cloistered and very censored. And there are anti-Zionist Jews. I'm not denying the possibility of that at all. If you listen to anti-Zionist Jews speak, they will actually say that Zionism is an inversion of the Jewish faith. I'm inclined to believe that's probably true. If you were never supposed to establish a Jewish state and you are entirely committed to establishing a Jewish state, it seems like an inversion to me, but I know that there are other ways to view that. I don't think those ways are right, or I would believe those ways instead, but I know the argument's out there. And rather than be forced to flee to safety in Palestine or the United States, and again, the whole narrative, hook, line, and sinker. The fleeing to Palestine was facilitated by the Zionist partnership with the Nazis in Havara, the transfer agreement. Okay, that's what set up the regime proxy state of Israel in its current form. And there were like other options. I think Madagascar was one of them. There are like 9 or 10 other options for potential Israels. And so with that in mind, to think that the ground they're on now is the ancestral home of these exact people is a preposterous notion, but one that, of course, she's not opposed to. Perhaps what is needed is a modern day universalization of that concept, a commitment to the right to the here-ness of this particular ailing planet, to these frail bodies, to the right to live in dignity wherever on the planet we are, even when the inevitable shocks forces us to move. I don't know what that means. Here-ness can be portable, free of nationalism, rooted in solidarity, respectful of indigenous rights, and unbounded by borders. So again, the nation is meaningless. And anyone who wants to protect a nation, I guess, is evil. Should everyone be allowed to live everywhere? Do we have to accept pedophiles into our society as co-equal members that should have the same access to society as everyone else? There are people on the left who argue that, yes, it's just an orientation and we should be amenable to those people. But that's obviously wrong. We wouldn't want to set up a society where that was okay everywhere. Imagine the kind of top-down control it would require to make people who are naturally revolted by the concept accept it and tolerate it as part of just how life is, and they have to deal with it. These people are insane. And so now we're talking about oh no, I thought that this was about here. This is the trans artist. We'll get there in a second. She says, to finish this out, we have reached a choice point, not about whether we are facing apocalypse, but what form it will take. The activist sisters, Adrienne Marie and Autumn Brown, touched on this recently on their aptly named podcast, How to Survive the End of the World. In this moment, when end times fascism is waging war on every front, new alliances are essential. But instead of asking, do we all share the same worldview? Adrienne urges us to ask, is your heart beating and do you plan to live? Then come this way and we will figure out the rest on the other side. Give me a break. To have hope of combating the end times fascists with their ever-constructing and asphyxiating concentric circles of ordered love, that localism concept we talked about, what is it? Wow, man, I'm forgetting forgot what the concept is called. The Latin. It's escaping my mind right now. I've gone all the way up and now I've missed it. Ordo amoris. I was going to say it wrong. She says, we will need to build an unruly, open-hearted movement of the earth-loving faithful to this planet, its people, its creatures, and to the possibility of a livable future for all of us, faithful to hear, or to quote Anoni, and Anoni is the trans artist that she's referred to many times. This time referring to the goddess in which she now places her faith. This is the quote from the trans artist. Have you stopped to consider that this might have been her best idea? So the system that it is now. That's really something. So what we have to do is cling to this system. Can't go down the road of Christianity. Definitely don't go down the road of Christian Zionism, and I might get on board with that. We need to maintain indigenous cosmologies, a faith-based belief in her goddess, a faith-based belief in the science, that priestly class in the white robes, the academics, the experts, the globalists, because she doesn't like borders. The world as it has been. The world order that is clearly collapsing right now. And you have to look around, even if you want to ignore the informational timeline aspect, although I think it's entirely relevant. You can look at what other countries around the world are doing. They're going in the same direction. It's an unstoppable movement in that direction. People have realized, oh, something's wrong with the way that we were going, and we need to turn around right now. So once everybody does that mean that everyone will be walking in the right direction? No, it doesn't. There's going to be a number of directions that people take, and probably only one of them is the right direction. So we have to try to remove all the other ones through a deductive process. That requires skepticism. That requires a knowledge and understanding of what those other directions might be and where we can perceive them leading, where other people have thought about them leading, and then figuring out which one is the right one. And I think through that skeptical process, then we find God and we go in that direction, understanding our responsibilities underneath that rubric. And, you know, we can oppose these other wrong directions, but it's not that all the directions are wrong and that what we should choose is to maintain things as they were. There are a lot of people clinging to that system because they don't know what else the future could look like. And I understand that it's scary. Everybody who has awakened in their lifetimes or was awakened from day one, and there are very few people like that. A lot of people who have been awake their entire lives find other ways into the system, and sometimes are headed in the wrong direction. But anybody who's gone through that process knows that there is an element of that that can feel like death. It's soul destroying. It's an ego death for certain, to admit that you were wrong about everything and you've made basically only wrong choices throughout your life. But that doesn't mean that you cling to where you are to avoid that pain and that anguish and that struggle through that. Okay. If you understand that you're going in the wrong direction, you turn around and find a new direction. And if that direction turns out to be wrong too, then you have to trace that back and walk down another one. But man, oh man, clinging to something this obviously wrong that she is just completely deluded about makes no sense whatsoever. All right. So, man, I did not expect that to take this long to get through. So I apologize if anybody's totally bored by this. I think this is the basis of everything that's happening right now. So this is the kind of stuff that I really connect with. End the dark. $5 Rumble rants. Happy Monday. Let's start the week on a high note. Is this a high note? Hard to say. Hopefully it is. I believe we have a very bright future ahead. I've said that the entire time. And I'm not, while I don't want to embrace the entirety of the future of tech libertarians, I also understand that some of that is inevitable. We have to be able to understand it, to work with it, and still guide ourselves in the proper direction. And Naomi Klein did mention that some of this is about telling the proper story. I don't think Naomi Klein is doing that, obviously, but I do think that's important, because sometimes it's just the way that we're perceiving these changes as they're occurring. And as I mentioned at the beginning, it is the goal of the media for people aligned with Naomi Klein to present all of this as chaos and destruction so that we will reject it. And she might be just too ignorant or have her head too far up her own ass to understand what else is going on out there and how ridiculous she sounds. But some of the observations are accurate. All right. I guess everybody's good. I cannot believe that took an hour and 45 minutes. I was like, I think this will be about like the first half hour, 45 minutes of the show. So I want to continue talking about the tech space, and we might, man, I had an entire, I think we're going to get about halfway through the stuff that I prepared. And just, you might have seen in the Substack today, if you opened it and read it, Wednesday, I'm going to do a show at noon Eastern. Okay. That'll be the subscriber stream. And then on Friday, it is very unlikely that I will have a show. It's not a definite no, but it's unlikely. I might do it. I might, depending on what happens in the world, Wednesday afternoon and evening, throughout the day, Thursday, whatever happens on Friday morning. If I have things I want to talk about, I'll do a show. And then, you know, as I've mentioned before, we're kind of in a transitional phase right now, moving into me going on a hiatus to focus on writing. And, you know, in part, it's because I don't want to just be speaking all the time. All right. Sometimes it's not the best way for the messages to be disseminated. I want to try another delivery system. And I also want to actually finish these books. And so I'm going to kind of begin transitioning into that by balancing out when I do streams. I'm considering doing streams like this on Monday publicly, and then Thursday for subscribers, or I might just do Tuesday and Friday. I don't know what I'm going to do, but there might be another change in there. Doing 9 hours of live streams a week is ridiculous. So we're just going to pursue a couple of different avenues along that process. So we just talked about Peter Thiel and this techno dystopia that we may well be embracing in our near future. Whether we want to or not, it will embrace us. This is the Financial Times from this morning. NATO acquires AI military system from Palantir. Palantir is one of the companies that Peter Thiel founded. NATO has acquired an AI-powered military system from Palantir, the U.S. software company chaired by Donald Trump backer Peter Thiel and with strong Pentagon connections. And that is certainly true. And strong CIA connections, strong DARPA connections. And NATO, of course, has always been intimately involved in that process. I think that NATO is probably past its prime and maybe be disappearing. So I don't know what to make of this in full. But the idea that they were always separate and that one has to acquire the other seems, I don't know, seems like some sleight of hand in there. The alliance's choice comes amid rising anxiety among European members over a potential U.S. withdrawal after Trump threatened to stop protecting the continent if capitals did not drastically increase defense spending. NATO is also racing to keep up with the development of AI military capabilities by rivals such as China. Palantir's Maven Smart System, MSS NATO, uses generative AI, machine learning, and large language models to provide commanders with a secure, common operational capability and will be used to support ongoing NATO operations, the alliance said on Monday. NATO is moving at speed to step up its defense technology capabilities. The contract took just 6 months to complete, one of the most expeditious in NATO's history. And that's kind of strange. According to the alliance, and the system is expected to be operational within the next 30 days. We're talking about the advent of soft war. This is starting to sound like it's along those lines. And as I mentioned last week, Major Lowry had said he expected soft war, and the time frame he gave was by the middle to end of April. So we are in that period. We talk about the changeover. We talk about America's 250th birthday beginning 2 months from today. This is the period that I've been focused on for years. So the changes that people fear, they're being implemented right now, which is why, again, I say we're too far down this road. NATO said it completed acquisition last month, a purchase that, quote, demonstrates a strong and abiding partnership between the North American and European technology base. And, you know, I just said we're too far down this road. I want to amend that slightly. What is happening is a process that is not going to be stopped. And so if too far down this road means not stopping that process, then we are too far down this road. But to the extent that this road might be perceived in a negative sense, I don't think that's necessarily true. And I flirt with the idea, I have not convinced myself of this, but I flirt with the idea that what we understand about the Great Reset and some of these other, plans could be a fear-based narrative effort to get us to oppose that which will not only be better in a practical sense, but more moral. And I think it is more, I think the process of decentralization, fragmenting, multipolarity, and local control is absolutely more moral because it doesn't empower a centralized control system that has say in how the lives of people it cannot even perceive should be governed and run. So is the Great Reset and are the stories around it that are at some level the philosophical basis for a lot of the thought on our side of the football, including my own, is some of that a fear-based narrative put forward by these diabolically evil characters like Klaus Schwab, like Yuval Noah Harari? It's something that I'm not convinced of, but it's definitely something that I have to entertain because I don't think it's a zero possibility potential outcome or potential description of the situation as it already exists, maybe not an outcome. Back to the article. Financial terms of the deal were not disclosed, but it is likely to be one of Palantir's most significant defense contracts this year. Thiel, one of Silicon Valley's most prominent conservative figures, was a prominent backer of Trump's first run for president in 2016 and played a big role in supporting Vice President J.D. Vance in his successful bid to be selected as Trump's running mate. Skipping down. The U.S. military already uses its own version of Palantir's Maven technology, which was extended with a $99.8 million 5-year contract last September. A similar system has also been used in Ukraine. Strange. Maven is used. So Ukraine had access to this, or some faction in Ukraine had access to this, but NATO didn't have it. And I know Ukraine's not part of NATO, but you would think that the order would be reversed. Maven is used to bring together satellite imagery with other sources of battlefield information using machine learning to scan for targets and speed up attacks. The Pentagon's Project Maven system dates back to 2017 when it started out using Google's technology. Google later stepped away from the program after a 2018 backlash from thousands of employees over the use of AI in warfare. And again, if we're into soft war with Bitcoin seen as an energy intensive defense technology, uses tons of energy, then we would need cheaper and more abundant energy to be able to power that defense technology as we are defending the country from this next generation AI warfare. It seems like that's what's coming. And again, this will be an interesting thing to talk about with General Quast tomorrow, because of course, part of the background of the plot for Top Gun Maverick is that the age of the jet fighter and the fighter jet are both becoming the pilot, and the jet, the technology and the human operator are both becoming ways of the past, and that drone warfare will be the way of the future. Okay. So, and it's obviously a metaphorical parallel for the aging Tom Cruise watching this next generation of young fighter pilots and how we're going to embrace those changes, or how the characters will, I should say. But this idea is out there, and it's not just soft war, and it's not just a Bitcoin maxi thing. Okay. Drone warfare. Now, if Jason Lowery is just running a psyop and has hoodwinked us into believing that that sort of warfare is not what the future holds, and that Bitcoin is not a defense technology there, even though it is enabled to extract real world energy-based damage, it is able to impose a cost in wattage, in watts, in electrical energy. That's the basis of his argument. And because Bitcoin is so energy intensive, that's what allows it to do that. You cannot, without an incredible amount of energy, wage a successful attack on the Bitcoin network. Lowery has said that it is even nuclear resistant. Okay. Now, I have a different way of understanding that, maybe than he's communicating it, although I don't think so. But even theoretically, in a nuclear weapons attack that took out part of the network or nodes, there are still other nodes around the world that aren't going to be taken out and will keep the system functioning. And so I think that that's what he means by nuclear resistant. Palantir is providing NATO with a customized version of Maven, which provides a platform upon which other software applications and data sources can be integrated. we're proud to support NATO's drive to bolster deterrence by deploying an AI-enabled war-fighting platform, said Sean Manasco, senior counselor at Palantir. This partnership underlines the alliance's determination to lead fearlessly with technological innovation. I guess we will see what the future of NATO is and what this will ultimately mean. If the energy future that I think we are embracing does, in fact, emerge, then you would actually want the deterrent to be that all of the countries can defend themselves adequately against the same form of attacks. If there were drones that can conquer any human-operated jet fighter, and I don't know if that's the case. We can talk about some of this tomorrow. You would then think that people wouldn't continue, that nation states or private armies or whatever wouldn't continue funding and operating fighter jet attacks and strikes on countries around the world. That's not how war would be waged. And then, if the AI defense systems backed by the Bitcoin defense system, theoretically, I can't tell you I know how this is going to work, okay, could prevent the drone strikes, then that would be the ultimate deterrent for every place to be involved with this same system. And then the problem reverses and you get back into systems of control and et cetera. And it's fine. It's good to recognize those problems and figure out how we should be dealing with them. But there's no point in denying the potential that these are certainly parts of the conversation that need to be understood and addressed. Okay, let us move forward. I think we're going to do a couple more tech articles, and then we're just going to have some fun with Desperate Housewives in space, and then we will save the rest for Wednesday. This is today in the New York Times, and I'm going to hope beyond hope that it has saved my highlights, and it seems that it has. Oh, thank goodness. Here we are. Musk. I'm so used to reading the word Musk at this point that any word that looks like Musk is just Musk now. Mark Zuckerberg, serial witness, will take hot seat again. 7 years ago, Mark Zuckerberg, the chief executive of Meta, testified for the first time in Congress. After a 2-week boot camp by his lawyers to prep him, he answered questions in 3 back-to-back hearings over 2 days in a baptism by fire. Mr. Zuckerberg, 40, has had even more practice since then. He has appeared before Congress 8 times and testified in court at least twice, more than any of his peers at the biggest tech companies. He has defended his company, previously known as Facebook, now it's known as Meta, formerly Facebook, on issues such as privacy, child safety, and the spread of disinformation. As early as Monday, Mr. Zuckerberg will again take the hot seat, this time as the marquee witness in the Federal Trade Commission's landmark lawsuit accusing Meta of breaking antitrust law. Regulators sued the company in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia over its acquisitions of Instagram and WhatsApp, saying it used a buy or bury strategy to maintain a monopoly in social media. So Facebook's Meta is now having to defend its business operation. They have acquired Instagram and WhatsApp and a number of other social media-based technologies and other technologies. And now they are having to defend their status against claims that they have created a monopoly. I think it'll be awfully hard to to make those claims stick. But I'm more than happy for all of this evidence to be entered into this case and for it to be public. John and I talked about Rico Grande the other night. That's my, and he calls it Rico Suave. That's kind of my, my humorous, if you find it humorous or not. Maybe you don't find it humorous. Reference to what I believe will be a RICO prosecution involving all levels of the takeover of our country, the corruption of the deep state, the corruption of the global regime, and the corporate interests involved in that, et cetera. So I think there's going to be one thing. It's going to be decided at once. The whole thing will drop down. Everybody's evidence has been put into the public forum over the last 10 years that this process has been ongoing, and maybe longer. It's been formalized in the process of these court cases. And then eventually the evidence from this case, and this case, and this case, and this case, and this case will all be put together in that one case, which will collapse the whole system. Rudy Giuliani, of course, was the one who famously did this for, I guess, kind of the first time in his prosecution of the mafia in New York. Skipping down in the article. I should have highlighted this one as well. In 2021, he renamed the company Meta in an effort to shed some of the company's baggage. He has recently courted Mr. Trump, including visiting the White House this month to try to persuade the president and his aides to settle the FTC's suit. So Zuckerberg wants the government to find a settlement with him, and the implication is that he's worried he's going to lose the suit, and then the Facebook monopoly, the Meta monopoly, will be broken apart. The company will be broken up. That seems unlikely in my estimation, but who knows? The government's scrutiny and legal challenges haven't inflicted lasting wounds on the company. Meta's stock price has more than doubled since Mr. Zuckerberg's first appearance in Congress. Mr. Zuckerberg is likely to face a more grueling time on the stand at the antitrust trial, legal experts said. Congressional hearings feature grandstanding by lawyers, and they are limited to a few minutes each. FTC lawyers plan to grill Mr. Zuckerberg for hours. They also have a trove of emails and other communications and plan to ask him to defend the documents they say prove his company's ill intentions. And you have to wonder if some of that's going to be about the rampant censorship from that platform. This is hilarious. This time, the FTC is asking Judge James E. Boasberg to find Meta guilty of antitrust violations. So there is, quote, a lot more at stake, said Katie Harbath, a former public policy director for Meta and the chief executive of Anchor Change, a consulting firm. So Judge Boasberg gets all of these key prosecutions and these key litigations. And I guess this isn't a prosecution per se. Why is he getting all of these? Is it orchestrated in some way? Well, it seems to be on the other side, right? Judge Boasberg gives relentlessly regime-oriented and leftist-oriented decisions in the cases that come before him. So if you are the regime side and responsible for operating the system rigged to get you your choice of judges in these situations, is this the person you choose? I think the answer is probably yes. So it makes total sense under that understanding that they still control some systems through secret societies, like we talked about with John Roberts or other secret societies out there. I mean, who knows how many secrets, how many of the key actors we see in these situations are members of secret societies. So we don't know what the control aspect could be from that level. We don't know what it is on the level of government corruption and deep state coordination, or how much those two things are intermingled. But you can also look at it from our side with Rico Grande in mind and say, If there was a judge who was going to make this situation that we know we will inevitably come out on top of, if there was a judge who was kind of oriented toward keeping the thing going for as long as possible, so all the evidence can get on the record, the public can have the adverse reaction to all his decisions. What do you mean you're stopping the government from, or stopping the president, I should say, from deporting criminal illegal aliens? What do you mean that a judge is allowed to go over the top of the president, and one judge at the district court level can tell the president what he's not allowed to do, even though it's in the written letter of the Constitution that he's allowed to do that exact thing? The power is vested in the president as the plenary authority of the executive branch. It's good we have these conversations. You would want a judge that would enable conversations like this to happen while also getting all the evidence on record for that move to be made in the future. So I don't even get mad at these things. I just try to observe them, try to understand what we are getting, understanding where that pathway leads. We want to get back toward the original Constitution, or maybe even further. Well, then we have to have all these conversations, and the public has to come to some sort of understanding about what these conversations mean. So when I see that we are being convinced to freak out about Judge Boasberg, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, to be honest. Let us go on. We have this today from the National Pulse, Raheem Kassam's outlet. Raheem was the wingman of Steve Bannon on War Room throughout 2020 and I think most of 2021, and then he left to start his own media organization. And this is a new thing that I haven't seen from them before, so I think that they must have just started it in the last week or so. But they kind of give the quick points in the article, and then they write it out. And it's a short article. They try to deliver things quickly and efficiently. That's part of his strategy and what he sees as a differentiation. And I think it's really good. But this even is quite helpful. But this is short enough, so just let's just go through it. Trump tariffs spur Nvidia to manufacture AI supercomputers entirely in the U.S. Nvidia is bringing the production of its artificial intelligence supercomputers and Blackwell chips to the United States, spurred by President Donald J. Trump's tariff policies that incentivize domestic manufacturing. Now, is that the driving force behind this move? It may be, but this is part of a decoupling process from China and Taiwan that's been going on for years. In Arizona, TSMC, and that's Taiwan Semiconductor, their Phoenix plants have begun producing NVIDIA Blackwell chips, while Foxconn in Houston and Winstron in Dallas are constructing supercomputer manufacturing facilities. Mass production is slated to scale up within the next 12 to 15 months. NVIDIA anticipates producing up to $500 billion of AI infrastructure in the U.S. over the next 4 years, creating hundreds of thousands of jobs and driving trillions in economic growth. That's quite a decoupling. That's not stuff that has just come into being. These are plans that are well down the road. And in terms of making deals with Foxconn, that's Trump from the first term. So you can see the first term of Trump continuing unhindered throughout the fake and illegitimate second term, the second term of Trump, fake and illegitimate term of Joe Biden these last 4 years, and the continuation of all of that and the culmination of all of it in this period right now. The engines of the world's AI infrastructure are being built in the United States for the first time, said Jensen Huang, NVIDIA's founder and CEO. He emphasized that adding American manufacturing strengthens supply chain resilience and meets the soaring demand for AI technology. President Trump's tariffs, designed to penalize offshoring and reward U.S. investment, have pushed Nvidia to prioritize American factories. Tariffs have disrupted reliance on overseas supply chains, encouraging tech leaders to bet on American workers instead. Now, there's also, we're probably going to talk about this at greater length on Wednesday, but I want to just share one of these posts. Trump was talking about, where is this? I know I had it. Ah, yes. He was talking about 60 Minutes. They had an interview with the comedic actor in Ukraine on Sunday night, last night. And Trump was going off because he was being presented unfairly. And they interviewed H.R. McMaster a few weeks ago about Ukraine. And H.R. McMaster was saying a ton of anti-Trump things, as always. And then there was an interesting little story in the Daily Mail about Trump calling, or one of Trump's people calling H.R. McMaster when they were supposed to call Henry McMaster. And then when Trump realized it was H.R. McMaster, he was like, why the F would I ever call H.R. McMaster? And that was the scandal. But it's hilarious, the coordination and timing. Who knows what that means? Maybe nothing. But worth pointing out here, Trump said he's so honored to be suing 60 Minutes, CBS Fake News, and Paramount. And Paramount is in the process of being fully owned and run by David Ellison, who's the son of Larry Ellison, who's the guy at Oracle. And Oracle kind of has TikTok at this point. He's another one of these American tech entrepreneurs whose career has been pushed to prominence in coordination with DARPA, CIA, and DOD. And it doesn't have to be a value judgment on Larry Ellison or Oracle or any of the rest of it, although the value judgment might also be a necessary part of that. But it's just worth pointing out that he's in the same mix as the Zuckerbergs of the world, the Thiels of the world, Elon Musk, and Andreessen, etc. So I thought that was interesting, particularly because he usually, to my knowledge, doesn't mention Paramount when he's going after CBS. So, talked about tech problems, tech solutions of these tech gods, these billionaires, these oligarchs, as they are often now described. And we are always told they're on the side of Trump. That could be one of the narrative manipulations as well, right? So maybe I should recap, because I'm just kind of having this thought as the discussion moves forward. But I used to talk often about what I call the old switcheroo. And I think that there is, let me see if I can find the switcheroo video on Rumble. And if I can, then I might just have that explain it to you. Because then I don't have to recap the whole thing and I can go take a drink of water. Let me see if I can find this. The machine is chugging right along. So I have an old episode called Das Switcheroo from September of 2022. Then I have, let me put on this one quickly, and I'll take a little break and I will be right back. But this is the switcheroo defense. And if you search on Rumble, switcheroo, I'm your moderator, you'll get the rest of the switcheroo videos. It's Russia that has long maintained a biological weapons program in violation of international law. So take our word for what happened in Syria. Everybody knows that this is what happened. It was all Putin. It was all Assad. It wasn't Hillary Clinton. There's no way it was Barack Obama. And Russia is the problem. I mean, sure, we said there were no biolabs, and it turns out that there are biolabs, but Russia's the problem. Also, Russia has a track record of accusing the West of the very violations that Russia itself is perpetrating. In December, Russia falsely accused the U.S. of deploying contractors with chemical weapons in Ukraine. Now, wait, what? So in December, the Russians accused the United States of deploying contractors with chemical weapons in Ukraine. Well, okay, but you just said that Russia has a track record of accusing the West of the very violations that Russia itself is perpetrating. So is Russia doing that? Because that's what she's implying. Is she accusing Russia of doing that? Or are we just supposed to take her prior statements as examples of Russia doing that thing that it accuses others of doing? The United States, the fake administration, is now using the "I know you are, but what am I" defense, which is always one of their boldest propaganda moves. Everything bad about them is actually something bad about the other side. It turns out there's actually no way to accuse them of doing anything. Otherwise, you're at risk of exposing the fact that you did it yourself. It's an amazing defense. Actually, it might even be bigger than the "I know you are, but what am I" defense. This is basically a full-on "he who smelt it dealt it" defense. It's strange, though, because I haven't seen the United States claim that Russia made COVID, but we do have tons and tons of evidence that the United States, along with the CCP, actually did make COVID. That we have overwhelming evidence for. So if that's true, doesn't it mean that Russia actually did all that? And if that's the case, why aren't we accusing them? So that didn't get all of what I wanted. And so I'll just recap the rest of the switcheroo idea. The idea is when you have a controlled opposition dynamic, and then there's a party outside the controlled opposition dynamic. Okay. I think you could do it with race relations in the United States from the Civil War through Jim Crow, KKK, and then the Civil Rights era. All of a sudden we were told, you know what? It's actually those southern states that are racist. They wanted to keep slavery. So they're the racists. And, you know, they vote Republican, and therefore Republicans are racist. And that's how we were always told that situation. It was like, wait a second. Democrats were the racists. Democrats were the slave owners. Like, this is the regime runs a global slave trade and has for centuries. You can't blame that on like Southerners. Or I mentioned earlier in Havara, the transfer agreement, the Zionists and the Nazis partnered up to confiscate Jewish property and transport European Jews down to Palestine to set up the global regime proxy state of Israel. At some point, you have the Nazis, the part of the controlled opposition, with people who are aligned about wanting to solve certain problems. And I don't mean the Jews, I mean other issues, because there were plenty of German Jews that opposed the Zionist thing. And it's made very clear, by the way, in Edwin Black's The Transfer Agreement. Read the book. Honestly, read the book. Read that. Read Our Secret Constitution. You can see these switcheroos for yourself, is what I'm saying. So whatever people align themselves with that movement, if the part of the movement that is like, oh yeah, I guess our partnership is over. You know who the real Nazis were? Those guys. We're going to see that dynamic take place. And I've been talking about this for years, that the neoconservatives that align with MAGA when it's useful are going to split back off, be more overtly part of the uniparty, and then Donald Trump will be Hitler and all of us will be Nazis. That's the narrative plan. That's where all this is going. And you have to wonder, by the same token, if some of the tech alignment with Trump is attempting to make it so that once they are combined and indistinguishable, once they adopt the identity of MAGA, then it's MAGA that's doing these bad tech-oriented things. And when they separate, MAGA will be left with that identity, while the people who go back toward the uniparty and the global regime and those power systems will be blameless. Like, sure, we built the technology, but it's them that really, like, they're the ones who led it in the wrong direction. Without them, it would have been fine. Look how well we'll use it now. Okay, so I think there's possibly a tech switcheroo happening. I think that makes a lot of sense with some of the characters that we've seen, the prominence of a character like J.D. Vance, and the whole, this was something that I began discussing throughout the Ron DeSantis op. That was the fall of 22 and all through 2023. It was clear that most of those DeSantis supporters, well, all of them were GOP establishment. Most of them were neocons. And a great number of them were Zionists or Christian Zionists. And then the rest were just grifters and influencers who thought that Trump was done and they would just, hop on the train of the winner and ride that to the end. But all the bad things that the uniparty right does, to the extent that they are able to successfully align and make the differences between what they're doing and what MAGA's doing indistinguishable for the normal person, then they can separate again and leave us with all of the bad things that they were responsible for, while assuming our identity. Okay, they operate to the inversion. They're going to take their negative qualities, figure out who they can align with, make the qualities of both groups indistinguishable, and then as they leave, because they control the media, they are going to say, yes, it was that group with all the bad qualities. It was not us. And that's the joy of history being written by the winners. And it's happened over and over again, cyclically throughout time. So to the extent that there is an attempt, and I think it's a pretty overt attempt, to make Donald Trump Hitler and us Nazis, the tech aspect of it would seem to align with that framing and understanding. So we'll see how that goes in the future. I hope that makes sense. Starborn says, I wonder if JD supported DeSantis. I don't think that he did publicly, although he may have said DeSantis aligned things. The thing is, JD had to run for senator at the time in Ohio. With Peter Thiel's money at the same time that Blake Masters was running for Senate in Arizona with Peter Thiel's money. And he couldn't be anti-Trump at that point. So J.D. Vance actually had to don the Trump disguise, the MAGA disguise, earlier in 2022 and held on to that throughout the campaign. And as soon as the 2022 midterms were over, in fact, Trump actually preempted the midterms by like 10 days. Somewhere in the beginning of November, he first said "desanctimonious," and that's kind of when the cover was exposed, the op was exposed, and you could immediately see all the people who were actually really deeply anti-Trump because of their DeSantis support. It was immediately clear that Town Hall was not a MAGA outlet, and people like Jesse Kelly were not MAGA supporters. The Blaze was not MAGA. So all these all these organizations and all their personalities were clearly just still committed to the uniparty right cause and trying to present as aligned with MAGA to be able to do the exact switcheroo I believe that I was talking about just a second ago. Dumpster Fire said, "Did you feel the quake?" I don't know what quake you would be referring to. No, I certainly did not feel any quake. I also don't live in California, so my quake experiences are not what they used to be. Not that they were all that serious before. I felt a couple for sure. One of them was actually on Easter, and I think 2010. Don't know how meaningful that is, but that was like a 5.5 or something in that range, maybe 4.5. I don't remember. But that one I definitely felt. Frames were rattling on the wall, but nothing, no real big deal. It was that little bit of aftershock. It's very unsettling to experience one that you can really feel for the first time. You're like, wait a second, this is going to end, right? I don't know. Maybe I'm, oh, apparently there was a 6.0 quake today. I'm being told in chat. Well, CNN hasn't figured it out yet. All right, so let's talk about spacemen. And in this case, we're going to talk about space women. We're going to talk about desperate housewives in space. And let us begin with this here video from yesterday.
Lauren Sanchez and Gayle King are suiting up for history. They're part of the first all-female space crew since 1963. The 11-minute flight launches Monday, April 14th from West Texas as part of Blue Origin's New Shepard program. Lauren, who's engaged to Jeff Bezos, helped design the custom bodycon suits with Fernando Garcia and Laura Kim, the co-founders of Monts and creative directors at Oscar de la Renta, who designed her 2024 Met Gala look.
Well, they're comfortable. Okay, that's for sure.
The crew even decided on the underwear brand, Kim Kardashian's Skims. Also on board, ex-NASA rocket scientist Aisha Bowe, civil rights activist Amanda Nguyen, and producer Carrie Ann Flynn. One small step for women, one stylish leap for humankind.
I said on social media yesterday, are they trying to make space seem unserious? I think the answer can only be yes. I've put that forward a number of times over the last few years. And I'm not saying that there's nothing happening in the sky. Okay. Just saying, I'm not so sure that the things they've told us about outer space, that by the way, are all just basically warmed over neo-Kabbalism, Kabbalistic cosmology. I'm not sure all that stuff's true. Okay. When they say that the Earth, that the universe was created 14 billion years ago, and then they change it to 28 billion years ago, and they don't actually know what happened 300 years ago, it's really difficult to take that stuff seriously. This was CNN's article yesterday about it that I thought was so interesting because of some of the descriptions and the way they talk about space. Katy Perry, Gayle King, and 4 other women are headed for the edge of space. Here's what that means. Blue Origin is taking a star-studded crew of 6 female passengers to the edge of space on Monday. One of the most closely watched suborbital space tourism missions in years. Yeah, they are Instagram influencing and not doing anything else. Fashion influencers, Kim Kardashian underwear advertisements, all done for Amazon as Jeff Bezos launches his girlfriend on a rocket into space. Give me a break. The flight will last about 10 minutes, carrying the group more than 100 kilometers, 62 miles into the sky, and offering a few minutes of weightlessness before they descend. But at what point during the flight will singer Katy Perry, journalist Gayle King, and their fellow passengers reach, quote unquote, space? That's their quote unquote. Is it when they look outside their window and the blue glow of the sky fades to black? Is it when they reach an altitude at which satellites can orbit? Or is it when the atmosphere grows so thin that it no longer plays a defining role in the flight physics? Okay. How does it move then? In the spaceflight community, there is no hard and fast definition. What? So the science also doesn't know what space is? Space can be defined in several ways, the article said. And the usefulness of the criteria for determining where it starts can depend on the scenario. That's why various organizations around the world use different altitudes to mark that invisible threshold for record-keeping purposes. Yeah, just got to keep proper records. And for suborbital space tourism, quibbling over definitions can take on a life of its own. Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic, for example, have been known to spar publicly over the matter, mostly because of one specific means of defining space, the Kármán line. That's a very strange way to word that. I guess it's correct, but very strange. And so they give a wonderful little picture. Let's see if I can just put it all up on here on one screen. So we have 300 meters up here, just a height they chose, I guess. 300 miles, sorry, not 300 meters. The International Space Station is at 250 miles. Nothing at 200, nothing at 150. Then we have Japanese satellite Tsubame, the lowest orbiting satellite when operational, at 100 miles. And then the Kármán line, what about all the satellites? That means there must be a ton of satellites in here, right? Or even up here, or even way out in outer space. And then we have the Kármán line. For a second, I thought I said common. I was like, I'm sure it's Kármán. Blue Origin New Shepard gets somewhere from 62 to 68 miles. That's what they're saying. Or if it doesn't quite get there, whatever. But it definitely does. And this commercial jet, a normal commercial jet, about 7 miles. And that's, that 30,000 to 40,000 foot range. So then they have a discussion on what makes an astronaut, because they don't have a definition for that either. Where weightlessness happens, well, it has little to do with altitude, they're saying. But let's go down to the science of defining space. The US government uses the 81 kilometer, the 50-mile mark, to define space for many of the same reasons that other organizations use the Kármán line. The latter may just calculate the phenomenon differently. Theodor von Kármán, a Hungarian-American engineer and physicist and co-founder of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, was among the first to describe the altitude at which aeronautics become astronautics. He said, "It's there." But even Kármán's initial attempts in the 1950s were inexact. You don't say. The atmosphere is indeed dynamic and fluctuates in density, which makes any delimitation, thought it was going to be delineation, delimitation imprecise, according to one 2014 study of the definition of space. So the Kármán line fluctuates between 84 kilometers and 100 kilometers. Notably, 100 kilometers is how the Swiss-based Fédération Aéronautique Internationale, or the World Air Sports Federation, defines the Kármán line. It's been that way since the 60s, some guy says. The Federation suggested in 2018 it might lower its definitional altitude in response to new research about the Kármán line. But the organization ultimately didn't take such a step after crunching the numbers. Whatever. So, space. It's whatever you think it is. That's just science. That, my friends, is just science. Let's take a little break before we go into some more talk about spacemen and desperate housewives in space. Gilligan's Island in space, that season wrapped up a few weeks ago when the spacemen returned from the space station. And so now we have desperate housewives in space. But let's take just a moment to support Rumble as Rumble supports this show. 1775coffee.com. Weak coffee is for the weak, and at Rumble, weak has never been a part of the mission. No fillers, no fraud, and no settling for mediocrity, just like 1775 coffee. It's single origin, small farm, hand-picked, specialty grade coffee that stands for quality, free speech, and calling out BS when it matters. Forget stale, mass-produced beans, roasted just enough to hide the flaws. Dark roast hits like a Trump tariff. Medium roast keeps it bold without the bitterness. And Vitality Mushroom Blend, real energy and lasting focus, no synthetic garbage. For K-Cup pods, whole bean, or fresh ground coffee, go to 1775coffee.com. Use code STUDIO for 15% off and start your morning with coffee that stands for something. Oh, and every dollar spent enters you to win a Cybertruck and $30,000 in cash. So do that if you want to, and don't if you don't want to. But if you like coffee and you feel good about supporting Rumble and me at the same time, then give this coffee a try. And if you don't like any of those things, then you should probably be listening to something else and don't do it, I guess. Rumble's going to be like worst commercial ever. No, most freedom ever. I am going to tell my audience to freely determine for themselves whether or not they should buy the products that are advertised on this here podcast. So let's take just a minute and watch a little bit of this spaceman incident, because when the flight takes off and lands within 11 minutes, they can show the whole thing. And I was thinking, should I wait till after to say this? But maybe I'll say it before. This seems like a ride at an amusement park and very little else. This is like Six Flags in the sky. And I think you'll see what I mean. And I'm going to speed this up just slightly because, we don't really need to listen to these people very much. And then we're going to skip ahead a couple times.
Good luck and Godspeed, ladies. We're cheering.
Launch this rocket.
Termination system is armed. T-minus 22 seconds and counting.
Now, everybody's just going to have to determine for themselves what that looks like. I know what I think it looks like. A spaceship, of course.
Team, go to internal. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. Command engine start. 2, 1. Ignition.
Oh, the power.
Liftoff. New Shepard has cleared the tower.
That is a flying dildo.
6,000 feet climbing. Begin throttle down to Q limiting.
I mean, to be perfectly fair, and I do want to be perfectly fair, I don't think it's not cool to launch things into the sky. I do think it's cool to launch things into the sky. And assuming the women are actually in there, then it's also at least a little bit ballsy to go on this ride. Okay, like this is basically like bungee jumping as far as I'm concerned. But let's continue. I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit. This is just, I thought, a really funny part of the announcement.
Relight its engine. We're going to also see a sonic boom. We're going to hear.
By the way, this is the cylindrical part, the rocket ship part. I don't know what the hell they call these things. Maybe this is where the engine is, whatever. This thing is going to land itself, and then the capsule is going to land in a parachute.
That shortly here.
And remember, this is something that had never been done before until just a few years ago. Truly the stuff of science fiction that you're about to watch in just seconds.
Truly the stuff of science fiction that we're about to watch in just seconds. And so here we have it.
Drag race.
A brilliant cloud of dust, and the rocket ship has landed. It's not quite as cool as Elon Musk's pincer thing that just the arms that snag it out of the sky, but it's pretty cool to be able to land a rocket, right? I mean, I guess. And then we have this, because we have to get the parachute footage. You don't want to not get parachute footage. Let me just switch this one more time.
All right, shortly here, we're waiting to see the drogue
It's just falling straight down
from the crew capsule. Those are like the guide parachutes. There go the drogue parachutes.
Just free falling right there until those drogues came out.
And then next will be the main parachutes that get pulled out.
Hear that screaming inside the capsule?
And all three parachutes reefing, and they will slowly inflate.
So they had the Desperate Housewives talking and filming content while they were in the spaceship. And here is some of that content. That's just a GIF, I guess. There's Katy Perry showing a little daisy to the world. Oh, it's so cute. Look how cute it all is. What content? I guess that's that. Let's keep going. Oh, gosh. So Jeff Bezos, after launching his girlfriend into space and bringing her back down, wanted to go greet everyone. Here is that greeting, a bit of a mishap for one of the world's richest spacemen.
Yeah. We love being able to share this experience with you, and thank you for sharing how
Watch
you
the
feel
circle
out here with our audience. So it's been really, really incredible.
Whoopsie.
So yeah, thank you for sharing how you feel out here with our audience. So it's been really, really incredible.
Wow. Faceplant. Sometimes videos of people falling are hilarious. And while we're at it, actually, you know what I really missed an opportunity on that I kicked myself for a couple weeks ago? We put it on DPH because I thought of it, but when we were talking about Mark Bernovich and his nunchucks, I completely forgot to add to this show one of the greatest internet videos of all time called Afro Ninja. This has been viewed 19 million times. And you may have seen it before, but it is a hilarious fall.
Are you okay? No, you're not.
No, I'm okay. Sit down, stay down, stay down. Don't try to stand up. Sorry, guys.
So confident before, total face plant, and then clearly not okay, but desperate to convince everybody that he is okay. And actually, while we're at it, that makes me also remember another one of the funniest falling videos of all time. And gosh, man, now I think of Grape Fall, the E-Bounds days and the early days of YouTube. Remember this?
It's a very easy situation to operate. You just push the buttons in right here on the two sides. There are two little buttons. And all you do is push them in, and that will release it. And what, right here, push the button and that releases it. And then after you let go, it locks firmly in place. So really, you're all set. And this is tough.
It is?
Listen, give you an example. Say you have you have to get up on the wall, high ceiling, vault the ceiling. Hey, listen, just walk right up. And I tell you, it's very safe, it's durable, and it's lightweight.
You're scaring me.
So really,
Wow.
now it's locked in place, okay? So really, you say,
Oh, God, Harold, are you okay?
actually, I didn't have it locked.
Oh gosh, man. That's so brutal. You just walk right up. Now it's locked in place. Whew. If you say so. But let's get back to Desperate Housewives in Space. Katy Perry had a review on the experience that she shared with the news.
It is the highest high, and it is surrender to the unknown, trust. And this whole journey is not just about going to space. It's the training, it's the team, it's the whole thing. I couldn't recommend this experience more. This is like up there with all the, different tools that I've learned in my life, from meditation to the Hoffman process. This is up there because what you're doing is you're like really finding the love for yourself, because you got to trust in yourself on this journey. And then you're feeling the love when you come down, for sure. And you're feeling that strength. So I feel really connected to that strong divine feminine right now.
By the way, you're such a badass. I love that the month of April, you're like, I'm going to space and I'm launching my tour.
She just advertised Jeff Bezos' space travel and her own concert tour. And, oh, by the way, the divine feminine. These people are bananas. That's a commercial. That's just a commercial. The whole thing is a commercial. They have co-branding opportunities during the commercial. And you've got to wonder what they're advertising. Maybe it's space. It's space travel, obviously, on the face of it. But what are they doing? They're getting all of these elites to blast off into the sky. I don't know, to trust the science. What is it for? I guess we'll find out. One last piece of this is part the end of one of the episodes of Desperate Housewives in Space. This is their tradition that they have formed.
And here they come, loading into the capsule.
And the significance here of the bell, and I should note before I have you in that each crew names themselves. They have named themselves the 6 taking up space, as each one is ringing a bell. And the significance of that is what, Ariane?
This is one of our traditions. All astronauts throughout history in various programs have had their traditions. For us, we always want our astronauts to ring the bell.
Bezos has his designer spacesuit on, and he didn't even go on the trip. Maybe he tore the knee of his pants when he face planted or something. What the hell are we watching? Which version of the technological future are we going to end up embracing? I don't know. All I can tell you is what's being disseminated to us, right? What's the purpose of all this information? This is the narrative we're getting. These are the things we're being shown. I'm trying to put it all together in one coherent piece, but man, we are in strange times. And I think it's going to stay that way, at least for the next 2 months, and then we'll see. But yeah. Is it real chaos, or is the chaos the illusion to prevent the proper understanding of the changes as they occur? And I'm going to take a quick look at the chat, and thank goodness I did. PJ Corrigan, $5. As long as we're watching hilarious YouTube falls, this one really cracks me up. The sound she makes at the end is just something else. And I don't even need to click on this. I know that it's grape fall. And I thought maybe I should play another one and do grape fall. And I was like, I don't want to make my show about watching old YouTube videos, but you brought it up, so now I can.
These buckets are filled with grapes. What kind of grapes?
It's one of the greatest
These are
videos
filled
ever.
with Thin grapes, and the winner this Saturday, who's studying music, eating international foods, having wine tours and tasting, vineyard tours, seminars, arts and crafts. It's a lot of fun, a whole day.
We used to make that sound so many times just to crack each other up. Oh, man, those were the good old days. That was like 20 years ago. What are you going to do? Time just continues marching on. One more Rumble rant in the chat. Boom Diggity, $100. Thank you very much, Boom Diggity, and lovely to have you with us. FFS, which means for F's sake. The space ladies, please let this insanity get people closer to space as portrayed to us is super fake and super gay. Thanks for your continued great work. And thank you for your support of not only my work, but the work of the Badlands community and the broader truth community. Without you guys, we really wouldn't be able to do all this stuff. And it's the support that allows us to live our lives and do this work without trying to focus all our attention on influencing and trying to go viral and stuff like that. So thank you again. Can't thank you enough. Polymathanon, $5. Know what else is fake? APL. Could be true. Could be. What the heck's happening? Why won't it go? I don't know what's going on. Man, I thought StreamYard was really going to let me down right there. That would have been terrible. And scrolling quickly to the end of the chat again, and that is all she wrote. Okay, so Wednesday, subscriber stream. Watch on Substack if you don't have Rumble Premium, right? It's going to be on Substack, and it's going to be on Rumble Premium. If you are a Substack subscriber that has Rumble Premium, you can watch on Rumble. If not, watch on Substack, and everything's going to be okay. So that is going to be at noon Eastern on Wednesday. So, and very likely no show on Friday, as I said. I will be back on Wednesday at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic. And Joe Biden was never president.
Well,
what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple, and if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
What's wrong with being an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times? What do you think, Max?
Do you want to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times.
It's not true. It's more true than I would perhaps prefer.
And I will not let you down.
We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.
What?
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com, and for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the rain.